Hello everyone, and welcome to another amazing story. What if Nazarik was in high school DxD? Russian Reversal wrote this amazing story. Please support them. Don't forget to like, sub, and leave a comment. Now let's dive in. Mamanga spent a few hours figuring out how his new spell worked before finally fitting it into his standard combat strategies before he considered his mission on the 6th floor complete. With that done, he returned to his chambers with the ring of Ain's old gown. Mamanga was not at all bothered by his appearance, which was odd enough. Though he had indeed spent an incredible amount of time in the body of his game avatar, Mamanga, he was still, remained, and considered himself, at least until recently, a human. He did not resemble school children who called themselves elves, or lords of darkness while playing games, and never once until then had he thought about something like, why are my hands not bone, I am Mamanga, am I? Except when he had a particularly vivid dream about Yggdrasil, confused in his sleep whether his dream was still going on at the moment. Any claim to the contrary is a filthy lie. He didn't suffer from 8th grade syndrome. In other words, Mamanga completely correlated with his human body, until recently. When he had found himself in his skeletal body, back in the first moments of this new world, Mamanga didn't panic, at least about that, and was easily able to adapt to his new conditions. Except with some strange curiosity he began to notice the features of his old new body. He was seemingly completely unconcerned that his body was now a collection of bones. Without the flesh and skin part, that is, his education at least covered the part where every human does have bones inside their body. As he began experimenting with his newfound spell, Mamanga only strengthened his own relative perception. The bodies he created had almost no effect on his self-perception and did not cause Mamanga to feel any wrongness. Whether it was a human, dragon, insect, or just a mass of living fire, the only feeling of wrongness he got was trying to use the racial skills of his new body, and his attempt to change his gender. Strangely, even though the formless mass of fire he could transform into was supposed to be sexless, Mamanga still considered himself a man when taking this form. When he tried to take the form of a human woman, one of his past colleagues, he failed. Even when in the sexless form of fire as before, but concentrating on his desire to create a female blob of fire, a sense of impropriety forced him to abandon such a thing. I wonder if this is solely about my perception and psyche, or the fact that the female body also possesses certain racial, or, in this case, sexual, skills that I cannot fully utilize? Mamanga thought about it for a moment before shaking his head and raising his gaze to the door of his private quarters before entering it. Mamanga had been in his chambers before, but had done so quite rarely, since the chambers created for role-play were meaningless to Mamanga. Other than the occasional chance to admire the beautiful interior, which Mamanga wasn't entirely what they are, only that they looked good. Mamanga's gaze momentarily slid over the expensive wood paneling, the magical chandelier, the desk, the huge bed covered with expensive sheets, Albedo, who was completely naked and now lying on the bed over the sheets, the pillows behind her head. Mamanga felt as if there was something extra in the row of things he had been observing, before determining that it was most likely Albedo's presence. He was pretty sure that he hadn't edited Albedo's data to the extent that he had changed where she's usually located. Albedo's completely naked figure lay on the sheets, black and purple bedspread with the gold-embroidered symbol of Ain's old gown on top. Her voluminous breasts with pink nipples straight with excitement, heaving in tune with her noisy breathing, and her juices flowing down the inner surface of her thighs. Mamanga instantly felt his mind begin to cloud over, before it was forcefully calmed down. Albedo? Yes, my lord? Albedo said with a gasp, causing Mamanga's mind to clear once more, as it nearly crashed by the mere tone of Albedo's slightly husky voice, perhaps as expected of a succubus, the ultimate seducer. You're naked? Mamanga couldn't resist pointing out the obvious and most important fact. Absolutely, my lord, Albedo replied, stretching her lips in a lustful and enchanting smile, before suddenly flinching at the same time as her eyes widened in horror. Oh no, Lord Mamanga, did you wish to undress me yourself? I beg your pardon, I'll get dressed now and… No. Mamanga tried to object to Albedo to calm her down, but when Albedo's chest jerked up from her abrupt attempt to stand up, drawing Mamanga's gaze back to it and forcing his consciousness to clear again, he spoke slowly. That is, yes, you must get dressed because I… Mamanga's mind once again grasped at the saving thought, saving him from embarrassment. Though what it's saving him from he rather not know. Nigredo is inspecting the other worlds at the moment, and she has discovered a detail that seems important to me, so I have come to inform you that I am departing at this moment and that you… that you remain temporarily as leader of the Nazarik. Certainly, my lord. Instantly, Albedo dropped to her knees, bowing her head and putting her hand to her chest. An action that took place while Albedo was still completely naked, causing Momonga to involuntarily draw a parallel with the eroge that Perorancino had once spoken of, and found that what he saw before him was far better than what Perorancino had spoken of in the past. His suppression of emotion again allowed Momonga to shed the rosy haze from his thoughts and respond quickly. Yes, Omo, have a good day, I'm off. After another moment, Momonga used the ring of Ain's old gown functions and teleported to the 5th floor, the frozen prison, his mind instinctively knowing that he needed to cool off. After which he exhaled, shouting inwardly, "What was that?" After another moment, the suppression of emotion helped Momonga look at the situation calmly again. If you think about it this way, the very first experiment I did in this world was to touch Albedo's chest, and she had expressed that she liked it. So, it makes sense that she thought as if something like that would have a continuation. Besides, I changed her settings in the last minutes of Yggdrasil and prescribed that she was in love with me, so it made sense that she would come to me for that. Tabula, I apologize, but I defiled the NPC you created. I am very much regretful. Besides that, how am I supposed to react to this now? Momonga felt his emotions being forcibly suppressed again. In the past world, I was a loser with no family or girlfriend. I didn't go on dates and died a virgin. And Albedo does look gorgeous. She was created by Tabula Smaragdina. He completely did his best modeling her appearance, creating a truly world-class beauty. I just panicked. How else was I supposed to react to this? I need to let Albedo know that her feelings are not real and were something her creator did not plan to put in her, before something irreparable happens. Even if she hates me, better she does it now than after I defile her even more. While Momonga felt a certain sense of sadness at losing her love, it was something that he must do. But even so, I need to gather my thoughts, prepare for her reaction. Momonga imagined the moment when Albedo's beautiful features would turn into an angry grimace, and she would cover him with insults and his non-existent. When he tried imagining it as Tabula saying it, he couldn't bear it. The newly existing heart in his new body ached with pain. Albedo, I'm sorry, I never planned for it to turn out like this. Momonga inhaled and exhaled several times, then looked down at his hands. His current body was that of a human. Momonga had used his past appearance as a model, without some details like biomechanical changes to his skin or pupils, or a connector for the hardware on the back of his head. It was a regular human body like the ones he regularly saw in Yggdrasil. Can I even think about touching Albedo? Momonga was suddenly in the deep throes of depression. He was not handsome, while Albedo was simply incredible. Everything from the tips of his hair to... The suppression of emotion worked again the moment Momonga's mind began imagining a completely naked Albedo in her groin region. Something Momonga had not seen in the past except in porn and brothels. And then Momonga lowered his gaze again, looking at the way the pants that had seemed fitting before were starting to get a bit too tight. Well, that's expected, I guess. Momonga shook his head. Though his mind was clearing from the mental effects of arousal, because of what it was, his abilities did not affect his body's natural reaction. A body which was responding to the expected reaction of the normal body of an ordinary man who had just encountered the incredible and aroused beauty of Albedo. Momonga was suddenly hit with a realization as he pulled a blade from his inventory and sliced his arm, aiming to hit all the deep veins, then watched as his blood poured from the cut arm. The initial blow did some damage to him along with the cut, but the blood that poured down did not continue to damage him. As in the original body, human body-related debuffs like bleed don't apply to my body, but the cosmetic effect makes it look like I keep bleeding. Another trick in my arsenal, but I need to be careful. I don't know yet if my blood would be considered blood suitable for activating vampiric abilities or Shalter's blood madness, for example. Actually, how much blood could I draw from my body before it affects my health, if it does at all? Would the blood flow indefinitely? Momonga held that thought and set it aside for a while. Judging by the presence of physiological responses and the ability to breathe and drink water, his spell-created body could somehow mimic the functions of a full body, right down to bleeding and demonstrating arousal. It might take some more experimentation with this before Momonga could fully get used to his body, but it could wait a while. So Momonga applied Create Body, once more reverting to his usual appearance and looking at the small pool of blood under his feet before shaking his head. I escaped from Albedo by saying that Nigredo got some information about the world around us. I should probably at least check Nigredo's progress in that case. After taking the decision, Momonga slowly moved forward, looking out over the ice-covered mansion of the 5th floor, before making his way to the door leading to Nigredo's room. Under normal circumstances, anyone entering would have to do a certain sequence of actions to ensure that Negrito would not attack anyone who entered. Something especially important in this friendly fire-allowed world. But given that the floor guards had done this sequence before and Negrito was currently working under the orders of Momonga himself, he didn't need to worry about this. So, knocking for decency's sake, Momonga opened the door leading to the area under Negrito's control. Instantly finding Negrito on one knee, head bowed. Momonga could trace a similarity in the posture of Albedo and Negrito, whom Tabula had created as sisters. However, at the same time, where Albedo evoked love and desire, Negrito, whose face was completely devoid of skin, hardly aroused Momonga himself. He had no desire to check if it would happen if the older sister took on a similar state of dress as his younger, that is completely nude. He really didn't want to know what horror Tabula's mind could conjure up behind her dress. Lord Momonga, Negrito uttered in her low-chested female voice, "You have arrived at the right time as expected." Yes. Momonga was inwardly surprised but did not show it, rejoicing at the fact that if he was not willing to show emotion on his face would show his standard expression. Which meant none since his real body was a skeleton without a face. Omo, of course. What have you discovered, Negrito? My lord, you can see it now. Momonga looked up from Negrito to see a screen showing a girl revealing 2 black raven wings? She doesn't look like a bird-man like Perarancino? Maybe a fallen angel? Or is it a unique race of this world? After another moment, Momonga noticed the fact that in front of the girl dressed, it seemed, in normal human clothes was a boy. Judging by his appearance, height, and clothing that suggested something like a school uniform, was a schoolboy himself, with short brown hair sticking out in different directions. My lord, Negrito never rose from her seat. I have discovered several worlds in the course of my observation, and I can assume that there are more. I have also examined the various inhabitants and stumbled upon this man. Apparently the guy and the girl were talking at the moment. However, after exchanging words, the girl took half a step back, after which an object that resembled a spear appeared in her hands. So it seems that the inhabitants of this world had some fighting strength. Momonga was curious what the boy could do. And what did you find out? With a strange sense of detachment, Momonga watched as the guy, seemingly surprised by the girl's actions, took a step back, then nearly stumbled, falling on his back, which made the girl with wings in front of him laugh. Truly, it is important to be alert at any time, as shown by the boy failing to prepare any defense against the girl's assault. Of course, it is very possible that the boy was just acting. I'm watching most likely the last moments of a schoolboy, a young person, and feel nothing from this picture. It's like I really stopped being human, although I can take human form thanks to the new spell. Then again, such a sight was a dime a dozen back in the corporate hellhole I called a home, but to feel nothing. According to your orders, I've maintained complete secrecy and was extremely cautious in my assessment, but I was able to determine that most of the creatures of this world are extremely weak. Negrito's words caused Momonga to calm down slightly. The average level of creatures of this world ranges from 10 to 40, though I have come across creatures of level 50 or 60 on several occasions. I was also able to detect creatures that were most likely stronger, but remembering your order and not knowing their abilities and counter-surveillance capabilities, I retreated. That's not bad actually. Momonga nodded. In Yggdrasil the real game didn't really begin until level 70, with the previous levels considered training, where any actual battlefield value started on level 90. The information that creatures of this world were weaker than usual is really nice, but at the same time, the information that there is someone stronger than this level still makes me wary. Especially since I don't know how many potential enemies there are. Momonga would have liked to scout out these stronger creatures, but it's too risky. There's no point in getting more information only to trigger the enemy's attack. In the past, Nazarik has been able to withstand the largest raid in the history of Yggdrasil, involving a total of 1,500 members. But such a thing is an inherently losing position, as in this case Nazarik will have to go into siege mode entirely. An alarming news. Omo, but why exactly are you looking at this man? The girl's spear snapped from her hand, then slammed into the guy's body, piercing through his abdomen. And though Negrito's observation provided no sound at the moment, from the looks of it, the girl then burst into laughter while the guy holding onto the spear fell to the ground, beginning to cough up blood instantly. Is he strong? Yup, that's definitely a fatal wound. Momonga himself was surprised at the callousness of his remark. I don't think so, my lord. My observation revealed that his level is probably below the 5th, while the fallen angel's level is below the 20th. Momonga only shook his head at these words. The difference in power between levels increased exponentially. The difference between level 1 and 20 was magnitudes lesser than the difference between 99 and 100, but even so, a 15-level difference meant that the guy had no chance in a battle against the girl. And it seems that Momonga's earlier assumption was correct. It really was a fallen angel. But the observation also revealed that this person possessed an artifact of considerable power. Momanga suddenly felt more interested in the screen, as he could feel his collector instincts begin to kick in. Collecting new artifacts was always a pleasant addition to Momonga's pastime, especially if it was a potentially unknown artifact from another world, power aside. So, what level of power did you detect? I suppose. Negrito answered slowly as if unsure. A world-class item? Momanga blinked. The whole world seemed to stand still for a moment. Before that staff of Ain's Ogown appeared in Momonga's hands. Seal all exits from Nazarik, full alert, prepare everyone for battle. Momanga uttered commands so quickly that they seemed to merge into a single word, then in one motion changed one of the rings to one that completely protected him from all surveillance and used a spell. Gate. Issei Hayadu tried to breathe desperately, finding that he could only get a coughing wheeze instead, trying against all hope to keep the blood draining from his body. Touching the spear that pierced his body burned his hands, but Issei still hoped that he could get it out of his body. But his arms grew weaker by the second and more blood gushed out of his body with each shaking fit of coughing in his chest, each one a searing pain in his punctured lungs. Really? In one fell swoop. Yuma's voice? No, not Yuma, the girl he'd gone out with, but the fallen angel Rainier, if that was her real name. She seemed to be both encouraging and almost joyous as he watched Issei struggling to breath and dying. I thought you're going to be a problem, but fuck, you were so weak. Yeah, just my luck. After another moment, the spear that had pierced his body disappeared, and Issei, who had been held in place until then thanks to the spear, fell to the ground. The sudden change in elevation caused him to hit his head on the dirt that had already mixed with his drained blood into the slush. Well, that's a job well done, maybe I'll even get some praise from Lord Azazel? Time to go, see you later, Issei. Rainier's mocking voice sounded the same time as Issei heard the flapping of wings, as if someone had opened them, preparing to fly. All Issei's remaining strength was enough to strain his leaden arms one last time to roll over onto his back, to see his murderer, to see Rainier preparing to fly, and to see a black portal, it seemed, from the sight of which Issei's soul sought to leave his body, taking his gaze into the blackest and darkest depths of space, consuming all light. So that's what you are. Issei chuckled weakly, feeling his consciousness begin to leave him following the sight of death coming for him. A tunnel at the end of which I will see only light. Haha, God, when I see you? Or maybe the devil, perversion is a sin I've been told. I have a few questions about the job of your angels. I would like to lodge a complaint. What the? Rainier, however, has a wildly different response to the sudden appearance of the portal. Recoiling as she looked in equal measure of interest, apprehension and fear, before turning around trying to flee. All right, fuck it, my job's already done anyway. However, Issei could not even try to escape as Rainier had intended to do, forced to watch as the first thing to emerge from the dark passage was a staff? A very expensive-looking staff, brimming with so much power that even the dying Issei could tell. A golden, sun-shining staff as if made of intertwined golden snakes, each rising to the top to form a crown as the snakes faced away from the center. In each snake's mouth, a shimmering gem of one of 7 colors, while the staff itself was covered in a sinister black and red aura. From that staff wafted illusionary figures rising for moments as faces twisted in agony, as if screaming in pain, before falling back into oblivion. And holding that staff was a middle-aged Japanese man. Indeed, a terrifying staff, the mere sight of which sent shivers down Issei's spine, was held by a man Issei could easily have met on the street, in a store or even at school. Only the realization that middle-aged Japanese didn't hold such staffs or appear from black portals kept Issei from exclaiming that this man was a mere passerby. Other than the fact that Issei's lungs were completely punctured and now filled with blood, and Issei himself was dying, of course. A moment later, the man turned from Issei to Rainier, who immediately cried out in fear. Issei could see another spear of light in her hands that had earlier pierced Issei's chest, whereupon she threw the spear. But unlike with Issei, the spear of light suddenly shattered powerlessly before it even reached the man a dozen centimeters away. The man only lifted his hand and spoke out calmly in response. Even his voice sounded so normal. Mass hold species. A moment later, Issei realized that he couldn't move an inch, though perhaps the reason was that his body was finally starting to fail after being wounded. But, as the magical circle of hundreds of intertwined symbols that instantly appeared under him and the fact that Rainier was also frozen in place told him, it wasn't. At least it was not just because his body was finally starting to fail. In a blink of an eye, the man was already standing next to Rainier with a speed that Issei couldn't parse. Then, with a single movement of his hand, he grabbed her and sent her hurtling inside the black portal. After another moment, Issei realized that his consciousness had finally completely failed him, and he was being sent into the darkness. He was finally going to die. He didn't even have time to mutter his last regrets, his full attention on the battle between Rainier and the middle-aged man. Only to feel a life-giving spring-flavored moisture pouring into his mouth a second later, the pain instantly receding before him, and Issei abruptly opened his eyes. As his consciousness returned fully, the first thing Issei saw was the middle-aged man leaning over him. The man's eyes expressed nothing. There seemed to be absolutely nothing in them, nothing human, no compassion or pity, as if he were looking into the eyes of a wax figure that had suddenly descended from its stand. Issei would have shuddered if he could, but the creature with the appearance of a man only picked Issei up with one hand, whereupon Issei realized himself already in flight, approaching a dark gap in space. A sharp jolt caused the flyer sheet that he'd received earlier from the girl who handed them out to fall out of Issei's pocket. But now Issei had very different problems to worry about, the flyer falling out of his pocket. However, the man who instantly followed him in, picked up the leaflet on the flyer as he went, before dashing inside after the boy, completely disappearing from the outside world. A moment later, the black portal closed, as if it had shrunk to a single point until the point itself disappeared. The only evidence that anything had happened there recently was the tiny hole where the fallen spear had pierced the pavement, and the pool of blood, the last reminder of Issei Hayadu. Rias wrinkled her nose before she sneezed. Something wrong, mistress? Akino poked out in a teasing voice that many guys would find seductive, but Rias only found annoying at the moment. A contract just stopped working. Rias only exhaled and shook her head. The demon summoning one. Did it go out of range? Her knight, Yudo, asked the most logical of possible questions. Unfortunately, in the life of demons executing the contracts of humans, there are all kinds of kinks that make their job harder. The person who took the flyer, for example, could board a plane and fly to the other side of the world, ending up in the territory of a completely different pantheon. A group which would not regard the appearance of demons in their territory calmly. Not to mention the energy consumption for long-range teleportation, making any possible contract not worth it. Rias could, in theory, teleport a few hundred kilometers, maybe even a total of 1,000, through several jumps, but such an action would have left her completely without power for a while. Then it wouldn't have activated in the first place. Rias frowned as she was in the process of being summoned before the beacon that was supposed to direct her towards the flyer suddenly disappeared. Maybe it was warts. Akino made another suggestion. Though, it would take a lot of strength for it to be able to block a summoning contract. I hope not. Rias shook her head. The fallen on the edge of the city was an old problem that Rias could never quite get rid of. Because of the potential scandal of a clash between the fallen and the younger sister of the current ruling Satan under the title Lucifer, the situation could turn very bad very quickly. The only consolation for Rias in that headache was that the gathered fallen were weak enough so that at any moment, if the situation called for it, Rias could deal with the enemy with her own strength. To find out that they'd gotten a reasonably strong barrier master from somewhere now would have been unpleasant. Not to mention, in that case, there was the question of who had actually started to summon Rias. Judging from the fact that the contract required Rias and her power, the wish must have been really significant. If the fallen found this man and for some reason dragged him under the barrier, the situation didn't look good. But because of the political implications, it simply couldn't be handled in one fell swoop by Rias. Well, don't sulk, mistress. Akino melodically spoke again, causing Rias to try on the pillow beside her for a moment, weighing it in the manner of a throwing projectile. Akino sighed almost despondently at that, hiding her face with her hands. Rias clutched the pillow in her hands, but still exhaled and placed it beside her. And then, gathering herself again, returned to the discussion that had been interrupted a moment earlier by the call of the contract, which was now clearly not working. So, we go back to the question. Who has any ideas where to find strong pieces in anticipation of the battle with Riser? Momonga worked as fast as he could, pulling off the theft of a potential world-class item from under a potential enemy's nose in a textbook example fashion. However, the gate he opened did not lead back to the frozen prison. Although that place was probably more suited to holding an enemy on a long-term basis at this point with the suspicion that the guy possessed a world-class item, it was too dangerous to leave him unsupervised. The Throne of Kings blocked the use of world-class items WCI in Nazarik and whose target was Nazarik, but it was a necessary risk for the tantalizing treasure that he's fishing. It is almost a miracle and a half to find a low-leveled character possessing a world-class item. But then, with its nature as an incredibly random find, it's no surprise that a low-level player could actually find one. It is also equally no surprise that the guy just got piked. Usually, WCIs were owned by 100th level players, and only those with the support of a strong enough guild behind them, who decided to give the artifact to either the strongest or most strategically fit member. In that case, Momonga couldn't allow a potentially incredibly strong opponent who managed to maybe fool Nigrito's assessment and the opponent who managed to kill him to access the 5th floor immediately. While it is likely that Nigrito's assessment were correct, it is very unlikely that a WCI possessor to be so weak as to be level 5. And that the assailant that had managed to assassinate and figure out the location of a WCI to be a mere level 20. So instead, Momonga moved the both of them to the 1st floor, next to the entrance to the Nazarik tomb, to the room where the teleportation trap was located. Momonga possessed his own world-class item in addition to the work of Throne of Kings, and so could withstand a surprise attack by an unknown artifact, and the teleportation trap could activate if necessary, separating the enemies, just in case Momonga found out that they weren't really in conflict with each other, or took out Momonga himself if they blocked teleportation in some way. Fortunately, Momonga's magic worked without any problems, paralyzing the two potential opponents. And Momonga's cast spell, Life Essence, which allows Momonga to see the opponent's health value, confirmed that the guy's HP, which had dropped to almost 0, recovered as he had used a minor healing potion. Experienced players could control the information manifested by using false data, life, spell at the same time as taking damage or healing. But most likely the guy wasn't using the spell after all and was indeed practically dead before Momonga's potion took effect, which means he was also not an ally of the fallen angel. Even so, though, Momonga wasn't ready to settle down so easily, especially when it came to a potential world-class item. Mass Charm Species. Momonga applied another spell, whereupon the girl and the boy, who had previously been looking around and trying to wriggle out of Momonga's spell, slumped slightly as their facial expressions relaxed, and they looked at Momonga carefully. "What's your name, friends?" Momonga addressed the two in the most friendly tone he could. "Rainier," the winged girl replied, after which her wings disappeared instantly. "How do you say?" the boy replied soon after, then turned his head to the girl. "So your real name really is Rainier, not Yuma?" "Yes, that's my real name," she nodded, before Momonga took a closer look at the girl. Dressed in the most ordinary clothes, at least for this world, since Momonga didn't think a light cream-colored blouse and dark dress along with small black-heeled shoes would have lived long in his past world on the street. The girl was quite tall, with black hair and violet-colored eyes. "Not the strangest eye color I've ever seen." Momonga shook his head, remembering how his acquaintances from his past world were constantly changing their appearance. He then looked at the guy, a short-cropped brown hair with strands sticking out in different directions, maybe 170 centimeters tall, and with brown eyes, silently looking at Rainier. "I don't want to interrupt you." Momonga realized, however, that most likely his magic did work and Issei would start questioning Rainier about the cause of his death next. And thinking about what happened could break the spell, so Momonga decided to interject. "Rainier, would you please step aside and wait in the hallway for me for a bit?" She only frowned a bit at Momonga's request, proving that she's uncomfortable with the command, though her magic made her see Momonga as a close friend, and so she nodded. "Absolutely," Rainier replied, and Momonga nodded as he lifted the Mass Hold Species spell in effect, allowing Rainier to leave the room before turning to Issei, who had risen from his seat and was shaking himself off, looking around. "Issei, tell me, do you have a world-class item?" Momonga decided to take the bull by the horns and asked an important question. Issei was clearly embarrassed by this question and not a little bit confused. "I don't think so. But then, I don't know what a world-class item is." I see." Momonga mentally noted that Issei probably didn't know the terminology of Yggdrasil players, existing literally in another world entirely. "In that case, maybe you have some artifacts? Magical ones, I mean." Issei only frowned harder. "No, I don't think so. At least, I've never seen them. Although Rainier said I had, Issei frowned again, trying to remember the specific term. Sacred gear? Which was supposed to be dangerous or something like that? Could that be it? Probably. Mamanga noted that this was probably what he needed, but decided not to tell Issei. And until now you, didn't know you had it? You didn't check your inventory? No, I didn't, Issei shrugged. I didn't even know magic existed until today. I've never checked the storeroom either. Or is this inventory like in the games? Do I get one of those? Probably. Mamanga shied away again. Can you summon it now? No, I can't, but maybe now. Issei frowned and then tried to concentrate, but after a few seconds he exhaled, no WCI in sight. No, I guess I can't. Or like I don't know how to do it. Can you teach me? Omo a little later. Mamanga didn't even think for a second about teaching the guy how to use the world-class item, not if the guy didn't know that he possessed the artifact and couldn't summon it himself. If his sacred gear really wasn't summoned at the moment, the only answer to where it was now was the player's inventory. And to get an item out of someone's inventory, it took thief classes. Something that Mamanga didn't possess but could easily get. For a brief moment, Mamanga thought about summoning Aura, being a level 100 ranger. She had good enough skills in thievery, but in the end decided not to do it anyway. She was specialized as a beast master, while her stealing skills were rudimentary at best. Most likely, Mamanga needs to summon a specialist in order not to miss out on the world-class item. He most likely needs to take a visit to Ashurbanipal, the great library of Nazarik, and summon a creature specialized in theft, a high-level one. Mamanga probably should choke his greed, thinking that it's a waste, and maybe summon a 100th level thief in that case. So, it's decided, Mamanga nodded before turning back to the conversation. Omo, you said you only encountered magic today? Is magic not common in this world? This world? Issei grasped at the strange wording before patting his eyes a few times and returning to the discussion. No, of course not. Magic in this world is nothing more than fairy tales and legends, though some temples or TV shows talk about practicing magic. But so far I haven't seen a single real magician, until I've met Rainier and you, that is. Omo, I see. Mamanga noted internally both the fact that magic was not common in this world, at least not that Issei knew, and the fact that magical beings like fallen angels were not commonly known. I take it that the only intelligent population of this world are humans. Speaking of which, what is it called, the world that is? Yes, only humans live in this world. Well, at least I always thought so. Issei clearly remembered Rainier at the last moment and corrected himself, and well, this planet is called Earth. Mamanga blinked, hearing a very familiar name coming out very unexpectedly. Did I go back in time? The panic inside Mamanga was instantly quelled. He did see some antique buildings that are common in the 21st century, but just put the thought away at that moment. No, there were no other worlds on Earth. Or did I just not know? Issei apparently never knew that magic existed, and that non-humans lived nearby. Perhaps Earth's past really did, and then they were destroyed? Or did they continue to exist? It's just that I also, like Issei, never knew of their existence. What is the date now? Mamanga asked, perhaps a bit too urgently, wanting to be sure of Issei's words. The 13th of April, Friday? Issei thought for a second, then finished his thought. 2005. Wow, I really did go back in time. Mamanga blinked. 133 years to be exact in the past. Haha, that's before the world turned to hell. Mamanga hadn't had time to look at the world around him when he teleported to Earth. How strange it was for him to use that name and those words in that sentence now. Seeking to capture the world-class item that Nigredo mentioned, he ignored his surroundings. But if he really was on Earth in the past? Mamanga shook his head, dismissing the unnecessary thoughts, then returned his attention to Issei. His mash charm species should have lasted a long time on a low-level opponent, but this world had changed the effect of his magic somewhat, so he shouldn't have been distracted. Probably better to. Message: Mamanga used magic to contact Ashurbanipal's elder librarian, Titus. My great lord Mamanga. A moment later, he heard Titus' slightly husky voice resounding in his mind. I have no greater honor than to answer thee. How may I serve thy cause, my lord? Yes, right, NPCs and their eccentricities, I almost forgot that. Mamanga sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose, hearing the unfamiliar speech before continuing. I need you to summon the strongest NPC who specializes in surveillance and send them covertly to the first floor. There's a fallen angel there who needs to be looked after. She's been affected by mash charm species, but we don't know how long it will last. I also need the strongest summon specialized as a thief to come to me, in the room next to the entrance on the first floor. Mamanga nodded, Someone who can retrieve items of the world-class item tier from an inventory is needed. Thy wish will be fulfilled with the highest zeal, my lord. Momonga was glad for the conversation to be over, that his mind didn't have to work overtime to translate the overly flowery words, before turning his attention back to Issei. Ahem, Issei, by the way, why don't you tell me a little about yourself? At these words, Issei frowned slightly, scratching his chin, looking up, clearly not knowing where he should start his story before nodding. Well, I'm an ordinary schoolboy studying at Koa Academy Class 2B. Momonga compared what he saw in front of him with the information that Issei was saying, coming to the conclusion that Issei was talking about a high school. A place that his low-class stature wouldn't allow him to even look at, back in his old world, that is. Looking at his clothing, Momonga could guess that Issei's family was comfortably middle class, and yet were much poorer than what that economic class meant in his old world. How strange. Momonga shook his head. I only finished elementary school and it cost my mother a lot of money. Only a couple of people I knew graduated from high school. How strange to find that many people could afford high school in the past. Even the random guy from the streets. I live with my mother and father. I have two best friends, Matsuda and Motohama. Issei shrugged, then continued with something that almost made Momonga's world tumble. In the evenings I like to watch porn, peeping at the schoolgirls' clubs, the kendo club or swim team for example. Sometimes they catch me and beat me up, but overall I think it's worth it. Momonga blinked, then looked at Issei like he's some kind of alien. Well, at least I already feel better knowing what I'm going to do with him. Are your parents influential? How will they react if you don't show up at home? Momonga asked the following questions, and only magic prevented Issei from understanding what the undead lord, who had taken human form, was now thinking. No, my father is just an office worker while my mother is a housewife, though sometimes she took some side jobs when she gets tired of sitting at home. Issei smiled slightly at the mention of his family, causing Momonga to shake his head. I really am not human anymore with what I'm contemplating doing. An office worker though, how nostalgic. If I don't come home they won't worry right away. I've gone to sleepovers with friends several times before, without even telling them before. Issei smiled a little as if remembering something fondly. One time when I went to Motohama and didn't come home until a day later, my father put me under house arrest for a month, and my mother didn't cook my favorite food for a year. If I do that now, I don't think I'll get off that easily. Momonga did feel a little bad in destroying a happy family, but he's willing to do much worse to keep his own family a little bit safe. Something that a world-class item would definitely contribute to. But anyway, they'll probably try to call me when it gets dark, then go to Matsuda and Motohama and their parents, and if they don't find me there, they'll definitely panic. Issei grinned a little, but not in a mockery of his parents' worries, but with a kind of warmth. Why are you asking? It seems that charm species still allows some doubt and suspicion to appear, Momonga concluded. He would note that in the future, charm species does not instill absolute loyalty. It's nothing. Momonga looked away, then grimaced slightly. Office worker, housewife, loving parents. Momonga looked down, feeling a bit reluctant to do what he's about to do. He wasn't at all interested in the fate of the guy in front of him. If anything, the fact that he was peeping and harassing girls and thought it was worth it rather made him look at Issei negatively. But the thought of his worried parents, especially considering the loving mother that Momonga remembered, and the office worker father that Momonga once was, made his soul stir unpleasantly. Are these the remnants of my humanity? Haven't I completely changed yet? Momonga shook his head slightly before deciding on a course of action. In any case, I don't yet know how this world works, so covering up the disappearance of a person, an entire family even more so, can be quite difficult. So, in the meantime, I need to experiment with my powers, so I'll just take it as if I were conducting another experiment on the effectiveness of my magic. Sleep. Momonga held out his hand and Issei slowly closed his eyes, whereupon his breathing leveled out, instantly sinking into a deep sleep. Control amnesia. After another moment, Momonga felt his magic sink into the boy's consciousness. Images, sounds, sensations began to flash before Momonga's eyes, and Momonga himself felt his mana slowly begin to subside. The mana waste wasn't immediately catastrophic, but it seriously overpowered his passive regeneration, so Momonga wouldn't be able to maintain the spell forever. He measured that even if he currently held the staff of Ain's old gown, that he had returned to his inventory, it would still not be enough. In fact, even if he used all the equipment he could find in Nazarik's treasury aimed at regenerating mana, it wouldn't be. No, recalculating, if he were to do so, he would probably be able to get close to equilibrium, or at least reduce mana waste to almost imperceptible. It seriously depended on what exactly he could find in the treasury. Momonga didn't thoroughly remember everything stored in the treasury, but it didn't matter right now. At the moment, Momonga didn't need to search for any specific moments or anything like that in Issei's past, otherwise it might have stretched out for a long time and the mana expenditure might have become quite obscene. Momonga only needed to erase Issei's recent memories, starting from the moment he fell asleep, to the moment when Rainier revealed her wings and her true nature, methodically erasing them completely. After wiping those off, eventually Momonga stopped applying mana to his spell. Almost 40 minutes of Issei's life had been removed summarily since that moment. And while it wasn't fatal or obvious, the missing 40 minutes of Issei's life would most likely raise questions. Momonga wasn't entirely sure if he could. The spell had worked quite differently in the past, but he tried to trust his senses and add a new memory to Issei. Using the most recent memory, that is of Issei being killed by the fallen angel, Momonga substituted something else. Using Momonga's own memory of the Guardian of Asgard or more their voice lines, he inserted a voice saying "hit the head," followed by the feeling of a blow and loss of consciousness. Now Momonga needed to rip the clothes on Issei and drop him somewhere on the outskirts of town. Perhaps he could even be dropped from some height a little so that he would simultaneously wake up and get a couple of fresh scratches on his face and body. In support of the theory of a gang attack, or something like that. It's not because of you, it's because of your parents, though perhaps that's not exactly a consolation. Momonga shook his head. It was strange to him, simultaneously frightening and pleasant, to find that he had at least some human feelings left. It was pleasant to find that he still had emotions. Frightening to find that he had only these slight emotions left. He felt nothing and was ready to kill the guy simply because it was the easiest and simplest of the options to resolve a problem. Even now he decided not to kill Issei, not because he was human, a child, Japanese, or a combination of all three, and not because Momonga, as a resident of Neo-Japan, felt some kind of kinship with him. It was simply because he saw in Issei's parents a parallel with his own situation. Though it was a little strange to him to see Issei's mother as he saw his own. But in Issei's father he did see himself, and it led him to some strange associations that Momonga would rather not contemplate. Finally wading out of Issei's memory, Momonga heard a light knock on the door, then turned around to come in. A moment later, the door to the room opened, whereupon the silhouette of a man dressed in baggy black clothing completely concealing his features appeared. His head was concealed under a high-lifted black hood sealed with gold staples attached to the rest of his clothing. He wore a traditional but all-black short kimono, transitioning into wide, baggy pants that ended in straps that covered his legs and feet. With his feet transitioning, seemingly even merging with his wooden boots on perpendicular platforms, also black, on which he moved entirely silently. Gomen. Momonga nodded toward the newly summoned NPC, a level 80 ninja-type summon that specializes in thievery, who dropped to his knees in an instant in one fused motion. I'm glad to be in your service, my lord. Gomen, one of the ninja-type beings kept for summoning in Ashurbanipal, specialized in stealing, so it was the right choice. Technically he was level 80, so it wasn't the most ideal of all the options that existed in Yggdrasil, but Ashurbanipal didn't keep many books to summon creatures above 80. And among that group, Momonga couldn't think of anyone who specialized entirely in stealing, unlike Gomen, so he really was most likely the best of the options. What does my lord commands? You need to completely free this guy's inventory. Momonga pointed at the lying Issei. Try not to kill him, but freeing his inventory completely is of the highest priority. Absolutely, my lord. Gomen bowed deeply to Momonga after his command, then rose from his knees in one motion and made his way to the sleeping Issei. As Gomen made his way to the sleeping boy, he looked down at him through the hood that seemed to block his view. Though it would be more accurate to say that his hood was his face and eyes, it was the shape that Gomen took because that was the shape he was. Gomen had been summoned by Titus Aeneas Secundus to serve the supreme being, Lord Momonga, the greatest of warriors and the smartest of rulers, the most cunning of commanders and the strongest of mages. He who allowed no mistakes and gave light under the shadow of his gaze to anyone who bent his head and his knee. And so Gomen was at a loss. Why was his presence necessary? Was this but another test? But as a servant, it was not his job to question his master's orders, he simply carried them out. As he reached out his hands to the sleeping young man, Gomen instantly sensed exactly what the Lord wanted stolen in the boy's inventory. He even instantly knew exactly what was stored in his inventory. Longinus, boosted gear, Gomen noted to himself, but did not bother his lord with unnecessary information that he already knew in his infinite wisdom anyway. What he found later, however, caused the ninja's thoughts to stall a moment later. In addition to the object, Longinus, there was another thing in the boy's inventory, or rather, a living creature. Unlike his other summoned brethren, such as Hanzo, who specialized in gathering information and stealth, Gomen had no specialized abilities regarding enemy assessment. At the same time, however, Gomen still possessed the skills of a related specialization, so it could at least roughly determine the dragon's level. The dragon was considerably stronger than him. But at the same time, it was no surprise. Though he was an 80th level creature, it was primarily a thief, and mostly had skills related to that very activity, not fighting. Lord Momonga was much stronger than him as well. Then again, why state the obvious? Of course, this couldn't completely appease Gomen's worry, knowing that he would let a potentially hostile monster out. But the Gordian knot of his doubts was dispelled by the words Lord Momonga had told him just a few seconds ago. Release his inventory completely. In other words, his lord already knew that the boy's inventory contained a dragon, and so Gomen could only applaud his lord's knowledge, and as his master's faithful servant, do his bidding. So, a moment later, a gauntlet came into the light in Gomen's hands, the Longinus, which instantly cracked, releasing the dragon contained within. A moment later, the room became packed as the newly released red dragon crashed into the walls and immediately broke through them, as it crashed into the ceiling with a roar. You, the one who set me free. The red dragon, as far as Momonga could tell from the dragon's appearance and color, but this time much smaller than the one he had slayed before, turned to Gomen, speaking clearly and loudly. Know that I will not forget your deeds. Know that it is in my power to give you much and appreciate it, for I grant you this favor. Tell me, what is your desire? Only Momonga's miraculous skill, saving him from sudden panic attacks, allowed him to hold his ground and not fall to the ground the moment a huge red dragon appeared in place of the young boy and some red gauntlet. Although, Momonga admitted, at the moment his face did not express any emotion solely because it was frozen in shock. Silent magic. Life essence. Silent magic. Mana essence. The Momonga uttered silently to himself, casting his usual suite of magics, before sighing in relief. Less than the great red dragon I killed a little earlier, but it's definitely a 100-level dragon. It has almost as much mana as I do, and I had to go a lot to break the max cap of 100, and apparently this dragon is intelligent, so fighting it is undesirable. DCH dragons are filthy cheaters. A moment later, Momonga came back to reality again, watching as Gomen continued to stare silently at the dragon, perhaps waiting for Momonga's command, or was just finding a way to escape. And although the creature's face was not visible, because its size made his head far above the canopy, for some reason Momonga was sure that it was now glaring at Momonga. It was as if the dragon were trying to measure Momonga's mettle before he would fight him, or flee. Ahem, I'd like to. Momonga wanted to finish the phrase, start by introducing ourselves to each other, but couldn't finish his thought before he was interrupted. Silence, you whelp. The dragon responded with a swish of its tail, crashing into Momonga. The creature's attack was clearly not serious, as Momonga was sure that the dragon could have attacked with far more force. Especially considering that the tail attack was bludgeoning damage and with body of effulgent barrel, still active, it had no chance in hell of breaking through Momonga's passive barrier. But even without waiting for the tail to hit Momonga, Gomen reacted much faster, instantly striking the dragon that had dared to attack his lord. A battle is undesirable but apparently inevitable. Momonga sighed, feeling the staff that had now become somewhat familiar appear in his hand, then releasing it beside him. Triplet maximized magic, reality slash. A moment later, 3 kaleidoscopic slashes made their way to their target, crashing into the dragon's body. As 3 deep gashes appeared on the dragon's body, it howled in pain and turned to Momonga. The dragon's health had decreased by a decent amount, but Momonga needed to be smarter if he planned to win this battle. Though he had achieved his main goal of distracting the dragon from the far weaker in battle, Gomen, he didn't exactly want to waste the NPC, which must cost a pretty penny to summon. Okay, until we know how he attacks, I shouldn't take any chances. Momonga used the best trump card he had. Teleportation. A moment later, and he was in a completely different direction from the dragon, who was busy releasing a fiery cloud of white and blue flame, where Momonga used to be. As Momonga appeared, the dragon instantly started turning around, looking for Momonga, rumbling in his growling voice. Boost? Whereupon Momonga blinked. Life essence, and mana essence, had just told him that the health and mana of the dragon in front of him had just doubled. That's just unfair. Mamanga shifted his gaze to the broken gauntlet that had already been turned into scraps of twisted steel under the dragon's feet. So that's what this world-class item was capable of doing. I wish I had gotten it, but I need to finish the fight now. It would be best if he could only boost once, but if he could do it multiple times, I would lose simply by a battle of attrition. The goal of all life is death. Mamanga activated his strongest skill and started dodging like a madman for the 12 seconds needed for its activation. True death. The only thing Mamanga could hope for was that the dragon in front of him didn't know how to instantly revive after death. Gomen attempted to attack again. A moment later he was joined in his actions by Hanzo, the guardian that was supposed to stay in stealth. It seems that the ninja preferred the opportunity to protect his master over following orders. Message: Mamanga dodged another fiery exhalation with teleportation, noting that 3 seconds of the required 12 had already passed. Still, he required another insurance just in case his strongest skill didn't work. Albedo, prepare the guards. You will probably be called to battle if my ability doesn't work. By your orders, Master Mamanga. Mamanga cut the conversation with the girl short as he noticed that the creature's health and mana had doubled again. His mental clock told him that 5 seconds had passed after the previous boost. Before he could think about it further, he turned his attention back to the struggling Gomen and Hanzo, who were desperately dodging the dragon's attacks. Mamanga needed to distract the dragon again. Triplet maximized magic, reality slash. The dragon howled, but once again exhaled flames towards Mamanga, this time flooding the surrounding area with flames. Learning fast. Mamanga noted the dragon's actions with some respect. So it can amplify his attacks multiple times for the next attack, making it many times stronger. However, this only works for one attack and requires a considerable amount of mana, comparable to reality slash, which is known for its huge mana waste. But the subsequent attack does not change in mana consumption, no matter how many times the attack is boosted. Cheat indeed. Triplet maximized magic, reality slash. Mamanga once again distracted the dragon, one last time as his mental clock struck 12 seconds, and the giant bronze clock hovering behind him completed its full revolution, after which he smiled. Time is up. There was a resounding sound of bells ringing, and the dragon simply dropped dead. Gomen and Hanzo froze as they stared at the slumping dragon, and Mamanga himself waited a few seconds, ready to use teleportation and send message to the guardians just in case the dragon was faking its death. There are many ways to fool life essence. The dragon, however, never got up even when the flames it had cast around it continued to burn, clearly not going out anytime soon. His fire spell is reminiscent of Demiurge's Mantle of Hellfire. That fire can ignore even immunity to fire attacks and is impossible to extinguish. Mamanga traced the still blazing flames of the dragon with his eyes, then shook his head. Okay, if it doesn't extinguish itself, some of Nazarik's creatures can put it out. As a last resort, I can use Nazarik's daily limit on recovery. It should cover the flames. I hope. Mamanga looked around him, noting the ruined walls, and shook his head. And, of course, we'll have to rebuild the walls, at least they're relatively inexpensive. After he finished documenting the damages, without approaching the blazing flames, Mamanga made his way to the dragon's body and thought for a moment about what he should do with the dragon's body. I hope I can get that broken ability of his by using Dark Wisdom again. But our battle lasted 15 seconds at most. The dragon must have had many other spells that it didn't have time to show. But then again, it's a red dragon. They're not exactly known for their breadth of abilities. Besides, it might not have been a spell but a skill instead, and Dark Wisdom can only absorb spells along with the defeated bodies but not their skills. If I lose the second most excellent body of a high-level red dragon and get something useless in return, I'll be quite salty. Create Body is a good spell, but it doesn't outstrip the high-end drop from the great red dragon that I lost. Mamanga thought for a moment, then remembering something urgent that he almost forgot, sent a message. Albedo, you can clear the alarm. The enemy's killed, and send Aura to dismember the body, take it apart for resources. By the looks of it, it's a high-level red dragon, so I assume it will yield excellent materials. Of course, Lord Mamanga. Albedo replied instantly, and Mamanga shook his head at her enthusiasm, turning away from the body, trying to find Issei with his gaze. And finding with his gaze only a bloody mess where his body should have been lying. Well, that wasn't such a good plan. Mamanga shook his head, finding that his mercy had gone to waste anyway, simply because a dragon decided to pop out of nowhere. Of course, he could try to resurrect Issei, but all resurrection magic required payment for the act of resurrection or the expenditure of valuable items. And Momonga, though he empathized with Issei's parents, was not willing to spend valuable items for nothing. Not to mention that Issei was clearly a low-leveled person, so a simple spell like Raise the Dead probably wouldn't work on him. Most likely Momonga would have had to use Resurrection or True Resurrection, which required large sums or expenditure of really rare items. Well, if it makes you feel better in your post-mortem, I plan to just take your world-class item or, I suppose, sacred gear, and let you go home. Too bad that didn't happen. Momonga shook his head, then held out his palm and his golden staff of Ain's old gown returned to his hand before, a moment later, disappearing into his inventory. After another moment, Momonga turned to the kneeling Gomen, Hanzo, and Momonga blinked. Rainier? Hearing Momonga's voice, the fallen angel slowly trembled, the acrid smell of ammonia spread around. Trembling, slowly, Rainier looked up, full of madness and fear, while her face clearly tried to form a welcoming smile, but constantly turned into a grimace of horror halfway through. The strange expression made it look as if Rainier were having an epileptic seizure right now. F.A.? Rainier tried to say something, but her voice trailed off so high that she coughed, and then she looked up at Momonga again, her eyes bulging with an expression of fear and surprise. Father? Omo, Momonga concluded that control species, or perhaps charm species, have some very interesting side effects as he looked at Rainier's trembling form. Rainier, a moment later, rolled her eyes before collapsing to the ground, unconscious. He needed to make sure to take into account the side effects if he were to use the spells again in the future. He knows that charm species were supposed to make the target feel as if the caster was their best friend. He wasn't sure it was supposed to make them believe he was their parent, though. Rainier surprisingly felt very good. She was running through a big rainbow. And beneath the rainbow, white lambs were frolicking. Rainier frowned a little as there was something strange to the lambs. No, actually the lambs were white only in relation to their fur, as each of the lambs had a human head covered in brown hair, and each of the lambs was bleeding. Yuma? Haha, what a silly name, Yuma. Rainier paid no attention to the bleeding lambs as she continued to run down the rainbow. Ah, how good. Also, a little further along the rainbow on the sides lay the slain Red Dragon Emperor, and Rainier ran on, knowing that no one could have killed the Welsh dragon. What a silly dream. And at the end of the rainbow stood him. Father E. Rainier ran across the rainbow toward Father, who for some reason, this time took the form of a middle-aged Japanese man. But Yuma knew for sure that it was Father. She still remembered when Father took the form of a burning bush after all. Taking the form of a middle-aged Japanese man were incomparably normal. Father, I had a strange dream as if you had returned. Back after you died. Omo. Father simply nodded gravely at Rainier's words, then held out his hand to her. Wake up. But Father, I just woke up from a strange dream in which you just waved your hand and killed the Red Dragon Emperor. Rainier smiled at her father. I am not dreaming. Omo, I see. Father uttered something as he nodded slightly as if to confirm his words, coming to a final conclusion. Awaken. Rainier opened her eyes abruptly, the beautiful large rainbow she had been running on, and the multitude of Issei lambs vanished immediately before her eyes. Unlike Father in the body of a middle-aged Japanese man and the dead body of the Red Dragon Emperor beside her. Rainier blinked, shifted her gaze from the dragon to Father, then back, then closed her eyes, feeling her feet begin to run on the big beautiful rainbow again. Awaken. A rainbow that immediately dissipated and Rainier opened her eyes again, looking at the Father and the dead dragon. Rainier wondered for a second, could she now pretend to be mute? Mentally retarded maybe? She was ready right now to start pissing in her pants. In her skirt, if it could save her from Father's wrath. Then her memories helpfully suggested to Rainier that she had communicated with Father before. He had appeared out of nowhere right in front of her as she had struck Issei, used some ability that made Rainier unable to even move, then she found herself in an obscure stone room. And then she suddenly realized that Father was her best and closest friend, and Rainier no longer remembered when she had any friends in the past. Then he asked her to leave and wait in the corridor. And then the room that Father and this guy Issei were in literally exploded from the inside. A large piece of stone crashed into Rainier's head and she lost consciousness. Thankfully her concussion only lasted for a few seconds. Thanks to her fallen angel nature she woke up just seconds later to see the fucking Red Dragon Emperor spinning around attacking something unseen, bleeding from the huge incisions that ran through his entire body, seemingly even separating parts of him. Making her come to the conclusion that she was dreaming, and that her concussion was more severe than she first thought. Then the middle-aged Japanese man she had seen moments before, who had suddenly become her dear and close friend, and had ceased to be after she had lost consciousness, held up his hand and Rainer heard a resounding bell ring. And the Red Dragon Emperor, or Emperor of Red Dragons, Rainer did not remember what was correct, rolled his eyes and collapsed to the ground dead. Then, seemingly completely unsurprised that he had just defeated one of the strongest creatures in the world, the Japanese man turned to the void, saying something about the need to dismantle the damn Welsh dragon into materials. Materials? The Welsh dragon. Rainer's worldview, which had cracked several times in the last few seconds, suddenly fell into place in the only possible configuration with a slight pop, bringing her a simple and understandable thought. Father, he had returned. It was the simplest, most logical and understandable of all the inferences Rainer could come to. To begin with, perhaps, the problem of the sacred gears had been occupying the minds of all factions and pantheons for a very long time, since their creation by God. Father. Different factions approached the matter differently, but all agreed that having someone on their side with a sacred gear was better than not having, or worse, against them. Many conducted various experiments, but the fallen angels achieved the highest understanding of the sacred gear system of all factions thanks to the efforts of Lord Azazel, and by necessity. The fallen were the weakest and fewest of the biblical factions, and one of the weakest factions in the international arena. The sacred gears were their only salvation. Without the ability to replenish their numbers naturally, and without the ability to convert people like devils, their numbers were constantly dwindling. And because the mass fall of the angels stopped after Michael took control of the devastated throne of his and his heaven system, they didn't even have that avenue to replenish their numbers. And so, the fallen had to begin to become well-versed in the intricacies of human technology, political wrangling and sacred gears, all in order to survive. Lord Azazel himself taught most of the fallen angels how to identify in just what ridiculous existence sacred gears are, and the most ridiculous among them were the Longinus. And so Rainer knew that destroying Longinus, which was definitely Drake, the Red Dragon Emperor who had previously been sealed in Longinus, boosted gear, was not only a very bad idea but in principle impossible. No one has been able to destroy Longinus before, and not for lack of diligence or effort. At different times, different factions and organizations have repeatedly caught carriers of Drake or Albion or other sacred gear, trying to unseal the creatures imprisoned in them for a variety of purposes. Some hoping for the creature's gratitude, some simply wanting to target peaceful peoples with powerful beasts. And they really could. If Albion or Drake broke free, even the most powerful gods would have to treat what happened as a world crisis and act with all urgency. Lord Azazel himself rated his strength compared to the two dragon emperors as between 0 and nothing. And Rainer could not even imagine how strong Lord Azazel was. The various pantheons then had come to the conclusion that the Longinus were more trouble than they're worth, and started trying to find ways to destroy it. But no one was able to do that. Not even the god of destruction himself, Shiva, could. The fallen angels, after much experimentation, had made little progress in their skills in manipulating sacred gears. Even Lord Azazel himself, the greatest master of artifacts who himself had successfully created sacred gears, though he would still deem it a failure, had failed. He, in the end, had declared that to completely destroy Longinuses, or to release what was stored in them, was impossible. But what did Lord Azazel's words mean to the one who had personally created those very Longinuses, and sealed Drake and Albion in them? Then who would have the strength to deal with Albion or Drake other than the one who had already dealt with them once? And finally, who would have the desire to initially free Drake from his confinement, only to finish him off a few seconds later? Rainer had only managed to fight a few times in the Great War, for she was one of the youngest angels he had created. But she was aware of the fact that in the past he had sealed Drake because he could not destroy him immediately. But she also knew that in those days he had been greatly wounded. His strength had been undermined long before the Great War began. Though Rainer did not know thoroughly why, his mind had been wounded by Lucifer's betrayal, and his soul destroyed by the death of his son, and so he had not found the strength to destroy Drake. But still, as an absolute existence, there shouldn't have been much trouble in killing Drake once for all, for he is mighty. Rainer knows that his hatred for dragons was great. He had hated dragons since the serpent and the expulsion of the first humans from paradise. And so, now that he had returned, he had immediately searched out for Drake and had finished what he had once started. After he had regained his strength, was logical. No, it was the only rational justification for everything that had happened. Rainier imagined that Albion would soon suffer the same fate as his red brethren. Indeed, if Rainier had simply killed Issei and his sacred gear had gone away to be reborn, appearing years later in a different host, that would have been a problem to search for, an irritant to him. And that is why he had appeared so unexpectedly before Rainier, wanting to deal with Drake before Issei, his current host, died. A grim picture formed in Rainier's mind, and she twitched for the first time, realizing that all this time she had been in prostration, staring ahead of herself with unseeing eyes, and that her unblinking eyes were desperately watery from the tension and dust that rose in the air during the brief collision with the Red Dragon Emperor. Rainier blinked, then looked up at him, who had taken the form of a middle-aged Japanese man, dressed in simple office clothes, totally out of sync with the power he had demonstrated earlier, and at a child. An elven child? A child of the Dark Elf? Lord Mamanga, if you wish to create something voluminous from the body like armor or cloak, I should cut off the scales in this place. The child, seemingly completely unimpressed by the enormity of the dead drag, poked at the creature's scales a few times, her manner of speaking talking about cutting up a caught game without any pity for the slain. But in that case we'll have practically no skin left for the scrolls. I'll have to take off the undamaged body parts first, so it won't be a very efficient use of materials. Omo, in that case, take off enough skin for one complete set of armor, enough for a cloak, gloves, boots, cuirass, belt, pants and helmet, but send the rest for scrolls. The armor is primarily for experimentation, there is no real practical need for it, while scrolls are a consumable item. Father supported the girl's words with a cold detachment, as if he were simply looking at pieces of meat in front of him, wondering which part of the pig would go to steak and which would be smoked. Thank you, Aura. He. As he reached up and ran his hand through the girl's hair, she instantly broke into a smile and let out a light chuckle, clearly enjoying the touch and swaying slightly in place, like a dog following his hand, in a not-so-appropriate way for a child. Rainier had heard of elves and seen one once before, but in general elves very rarely appear in public, especially in Japan where she had worked for a long time. Dark elves especially appeared even more rarely. But on the other hand, he was someone you could expect the most incredible and impossible things from. Rainier blinked once more, shifting her gaze to the side, to realize that she was not, in fact, in Japan. To the side were a total, black, indifferent emptiness that stretched as far as she could see, and Rainier suddenly felt her throat go dry. Never before had she seen what the dimensional gap looked like, especially in person. She had only heard of its existence, but she imagined that this was most likely what it was. That's right, she was in the dimensional gap, a space famous for its antithesis for life. And she was still alive. Rainier shifted her gaze from the void to the figure of the father ahead, then swallowed. There was no doubt in her mind, she still existed only because of father's intervention and because of his desire. All she had to do was say something against father and she was dead. No, maybe if she even drew father's attention to herself and she was dead. And if so, she had already failed on all fronts. Omo Rainier, I presume? Father turned to Rainier, and she felt a shudder run through her entire body. She then reflexively grasped her groin as if trying to forcibly keep her bladder from emptying. Fallen angels have always died in excruciating pain, and for it to be drawn for a long time. Rainier swallowed. Father does not forgive betrayal. But I did fall after he died, so potentially it wasn't actually a betrayal? Or, I suppose, not died but went into the dimensional gap for some reason. I fell because of a mistake. It was all because the heaven system was out of control. Father, forgive me, I repent, I repent. I believe, Lord, I believe. Rainier, I know you are capable of speaking. Father's eye traced Rainier's hand to her groin, whereupon she realized how provocative the pose looked, and this despite the fact that she was a fallen angel. She had to show that she was remorseful for her fall, that it was not her fault, not to give evidence to the contrary, especially when she smelled of urine. Rainier felt her brain completely boil over, then began to cover her eyes, feeling her feet touch the beautiful rainbow again. Omo, this is starting to get a bit tiresome. Awaken. Rainier came back to reality again, looking at her father approaching and the dark elven girl beside him. What did he call her? Aura or something. Lord Mamanga, if she's boring you, I'll get rid of her at this very moment. Aura took a step toward Rainier and Rainier realized that the girl would happily follow through with her threat. The second father commanded. F.A. Rainier tried to squeeze words out of herself, but could only make a squeaking sound. The threat to her life, however, allowed her to force out a semblance of a word out. F.A. Father. Rainier then dropped to her knees, instantly folding her hands in a gesture of prayer. Father, forgive me. I repent of all my sins, I repent of my sins, murder and theft and profanity, lying, blasphemy, especially of that last one. 3 times I repent, 3 times I believe, repent and believe. Rainier fell into a kind of madness, repeating over and over repent and believe, unable to utter anything else but these words. Omo, Father's voice passed her ears. I think I still have a scroll of Cure Madness in my inventory somewhere, but is there any point in using it? Aura? A moment later, Rainier's consciousness was pierced by fear. An unbelievable terror that forced her into silence, interrupting her mutterings, choking instead on a mute scream, frozen, unwilling to even move. No, deprived of that possibility. It was a fear and terror that had no form, that is permeating her whole being, born from the depths of the oldest and most primal of fears, born before the moment of human consciousness, from their animal instincts. Omo, enough. And the fear disappeared a moment later, as if it had never existed, allowing Rainier to exhale a breath that she had held back without realizing, after which she emptied the contents of her stomach. Blah. Aura's voice broke through the veil of her consciousness before Rainier could lift her face, busy as she was dumping the entire contents of her humble lunch and afternoon snack onto the stone floors. Omo, quite uncultured. Father furrowed his brow slightly, but Rainier had been through so much in the last hour that she no longer even knew whether she should have fallen into another panic or just give up and go with the flow. What do you mean when you call the Lord Mamanga, Father? Aura, however, clearly annoyed by Rainier's actions, reached for her belt, whereupon Rainier flinched when the tip of a whip, so fast that even her heightened senses as a fallen angel could not track its movements, clicked beside her. Rainier looked up at Father, expecting his reaction, but he only looked back at her silently. Why is Father silent? Rainier blinked, knowing that even at the height of God's anger, torture wasn't an option he would choose. Nor would her creation be a mystery to Father, he was the one that created her after all. Is it a test? Yes, that's right, it's a test. He wants to know what I have to say about him. Haha, I don't think this test is that effective considering that he's standing around with his omniscience. However, as I am in the focus of his powers, it probably makes no difference to him whether he's standing around or not. Haha. Once again the rainbows are beckoning her, but she knows that if she answered the call, she would be gone for good. I'm not talking about him being my biological father. Rainier finally understood that her old understanding of the world is gone for good. All she had left was to walk through the ruins, trying to find a sign of what would become her new normality from this day forward. I was simply created by him. After saying it, Rainier thought for a moment. Explaining to a mortal, even an elf, what it meant to be created was hard enough. The first thing they would start thinking about would be to draw parallels with robots or golems, not understanding what exactly Rainier meant. But Aura surprised the girl with her response. Wait, like we are? How I was. Rainier blinked, then looked at Aura. Father, for some reason, also shifted his gaze to the girl, who shifted her gaze first to Father and then to Rainier. Rainier wondered for a moment, could the girl really be an angel and not an elf like she appeared to be? Gently, Rainier tried to open her senses and feel her nature. To freeze in a vain attempt to free her stomach from the contents from which it had already been freed a little earlier. The girl, no, Lady Aura, was felt many times stronger than Lord Azazel himself, the head of the entire faction of fallen angels, the man who had rebelled against Father. Although Rainier realized after a moment that if this girl was also created by Father, then Azazel was very lucky that Father was weakened then. Otherwise, the fallen would only be left in the history pages, if Father didn't burn those either. I guess. That is indeed the case. Rainier answered, her body still continuing to shake finally after the revelation, then shook her head. The Lord. Father created us many years ago. We thought we had lost Father. Omo that. Father tried, as if uncertain, to intervene in Rainier's words, but the woman, finally understanding the situation in which she had found herself in, could not help herself. But he is back. Father is with us again. Rainier raised her hands in the air, after which she lost her mind. At least, that's how she looked. Rainier, unable to keep her shattered psyche under control any longer, laughed like a madwoman. To think, just a few days ago she had considered an errand as something that is most important in her life, the one she had received from Lord Azazel about having to get rid of a certain isekai. Never could she imagine that in the end of that path, Rainier had met with Father, seen the murder of the Red Dragon Emperor, talked to a dark elven girl who could deal with the entire biblical faction herself. And Father was still alive and had not smitten her. Rainier burst into laughter, unable to keep herself under control, and continued laughing until her laughter turned into hysterical howls. before collapsing to the ground, only a dozen centimeters away from her puddle of vomit and urine, then, unable to hold back her howls, began sobbing. "Lord Momonga, is it true? Have you returned here to return to your abandoned children?" Aura instantly jumped up in mute amazement and adoration looking at Father, but Rainier no longer cared about anything around her. The distraught fallen woman was laughing and crying as hard as she could. "Ah, Omo, well." Father looked at the dark elf with an amused and unsure look, as if to mock her ignorance. "About that, Omo Aura. So Lady Bukubukagama can come back to us too." The dark elf's next words made Father freeze. Momonga looked into Aura's eyes, understanding her loneliness. But how had she arrived at this point? He just wanted to find out information from Rainier. He had heard her calling him father and had heard something in the past from Tabula about such things. Sadly, he had never been a religious man and there were almost none of those in his social circle, so he knew next to nothing about religion. He knew that the angels were God's messengers, so, in retrospect, he might have been able to guess that an angel might consider God as their father. Especially after noting that he was considered their father in the same sense in which Ains Olgaun were considered parents of the NPCs. So, in hindsight, he might have guessed that if Rainier addressed him as father, that meant she saw him as her god. But he certainly couldn't have ever imagined that the conversation would take that turn. He definitely didn't expect Rainier to start vomiting and pissing herself out of nowhere. He just wanted to find out information from Rainier about what exactly she wanted to do with Issei, what she knew about these sacred gears, and whatever else she knew. Issei knew nothing about the magical side of the world, so he decided to use Rainier and get the information from her. But then she started calling him father, and then passed out, so Momonga decided to leave her alone for a while and get busy with Aura cutting up a dragon that happened to come his way. But then Rainier woke up, started calling him father, catching Aura's interest, Momonga's too. And so he decided to find out why she's doing that, and at the same time thought it would be rude, and he would hurt Aura if he didn't let her ask her questions. All that led to Aura now looking at him intently, eyes glistening with moisture and underlying hope, lips trembling, and Momonga realized that he couldn't upset Aura now. Telling her that Bukubukagama wasn't coming back would trample her heart and break her forever. Besides, with some probability, Bukubukagama or any other member of the Ains Olgaun Guild could actually exist in this world. Or, if he indeed did go to Earth's past, he just has to wait a couple of decades, and they would have been born in this world in the future. He has no idea how to go from there, though. Maybe he could fib and say something along the line that their rebirth had some unforeseen issues? Or maybe even that they had suffered from amnesia due to some random enemy action. If nothing else, he has time to figure out what to do then. And so, he wouldn't be lying when he says that Bukubukagama would return. After all, Aura's question was not whether Bukubukagama will return to us, but if Bukubukagama may return to us. And because she theoretically could, it wouldn't be a lie if he says yes. Omo, Momonga squeezed his heart in a vice and nodded slowly, no matter how hard it is for him to lie, because he knew that it would be a lie. But, at the very least, he also wanted to believe that it would also be possible. He had been doing that for the last 10 years after all. I don't know if it will happen, and if it will, when exactly it will happen. But it is possible. Aura, hearing Momonga's words, froze. Whereupon Momonga saw tears running down her dark cheek, from her heterochromatic eyes. So, she's going to come back. Aura almost whispered these words, as if she herself could not believe what she was saying. She really can come back too. Momonga, unable to stand it, stretched out his arms to Aura, then pulled her into an embrace and, unable to restrain himself, lifted Aura in his arms and embraced her. Aura instantly clutched at his office clothes, which he had created a little earlier, hiding the sight of his outfit, after which she began crying. "Yuwa." Momonga instantly felt his clothes begin to soak in moisture. "Yuwa." Aura may seem older and more serious than her brother Mare, but she's still just a child. Momonga felt like an old man as he stroked Aura's back and head as she, unable to contain her sobs, pressed her cheek against his clothes as she continued to shake in resounding cries. Rainier, on the other hand, had stopped sobbing a little earlier, and just continued lying on the ground on her back, looking up at the ceiling, before closing her eyes with a sort of detached smile. Her consciousness finally leaving her. Well, don't cry, Aura, it's all right." Momonga ran a hand over the girl's back, feeling her wailing begin to subside into silent sobs and shaking shoulders before, when she calmed down a little, allowing Momonga to put her down from his embrace. Aura still flinched periodically and sniffled noisily as she looked at Momonga, so there was no way to mistake her condition for anything else. Still, she stubbornly tried to force her expression back to a serious and even frown that only further emphasized her childlike directness in wanting to imitate her elders. Momonga could not contain a small, love-filled smile, looking at her action, which showed even more on his human face. "Lord Momonga, I've made you dirty," Aura replied to Momonga after a moment, still unable to get her voice completely under control, proof of how much Momonga's words had affected her. "I humbly apologize and—" "There's no need for that, Aura." Momonga held out the sleeve of his robe to Aura's face, then gently wiped the tears from her face, first from her right cheek, then from her left. "You are my treasure and I appreciate everything you give me, whether it is your smile, your work, or even your tears." Aura, hearing these words, looked away, her eyes instantly beginning to fill with tears again, but she noisily sucked in air through her nose, then turned, looking at Momonga with a slight blush on her cheeks. "Lord Momonga, I believe I have an important errand to run, and I must do it by all means even if it grinds my bones into powder. I'd rather you didn't hurt yourself trying to do my errands, especially if they're wrong or stupid." Momonga held out his hand and then patted Aura's head. "But yes, I suppose you should take care of the dragon's body before it begins to decay." "By your will, Lord Momonga." Aura saluted him with her usual pep, then teleported to the body in a single, cohesive motion, which, as if by itself, began to disintegrate into its component parts with a speed and professionalism that even the most advanced automated disassembly lines of his past world could not have expected. Momonga shifted his gaze to the blood stain, in which no human form was discernible, and shook his head. "The only thing that's left of poor Issei. Well, in that case I should think about what to do with the murdered Issei Hyudu." Momonga shifted his gaze to the side, to Rainier, who continued to lie quietly on the ground, and shook his head. "And I still need to decide what I should do with Rainier and her unexpected outburst, which I kind of indirectly confirmed to Aura." "Well," Momonga shrugged. "Let's hope it doesn't have any far-reaching consequences." And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed supporting the writer. Don't forget to like, sub, share, and donate for more videos.